So, good day everyone. So today I will discuss the lesson 8. This is all about global warming. Yes, global warming. So we will look first what is global warming. Global warming is the unusual rapid increase of Earth average surface temperature over the past century, primarily due to the greenhouse gases released by people through burning fossil fuels. Contemporary climate change includes both the global warming caused by humans and its impact on Earth's weather patterns. There have been previous periods of climate change, but the current changes are more rapid than any known events in the Earth's history. The main cause is the emission of greenhouse gases. Yan. Isa sa mga pinakasanhiyo yung cause ay yung emission of the greenhouse gases, which is mostly the carbon dioxide and the methane. One of the most example of this is burning fossil fuels of energy use creates most of these emissions. Examples din ito is agriculture, steel making, paggawa ng mga bakal, cement production, paggawa ng mga semento, and forest loss are additional sources. At the same time, yung pagtaas ng temperature ay isa din sa mga most effects of this. Temperature rise is also affected by climate feedback such as the loss of sunlight, deflecting snow cover, and the release of carbon dioxide from drought-stricken forests. Collectively, this amplify global warming. On land, temperatures have risen about twice as fast as the global average. So kung makikita nyo yung kaibahan ng mundo from 1980 to 2015. Makikita nyo kung gaano kataas ang pagtaas ng temperature from this 1980 year and 2015. So ganon kabilis makikita yung pagtaas ng global warming. Deserts are expanding while heat waves and wildfires are becoming more common. Increased warming in the Arctic has contributed to melting permafrost, like this one, glacial retreat and sea ice loss. Higher temperatures are also causing more intense storms and other weather extremes in places such as coral reefs, mountains, and the Arctic. Many species are forced to relocate or become extinct as the environment changes. Climate change threatens peoples with food and water scarcity, increased floodings, extreme heat, and more diseases, and economic loss. So ang makikita natin na ang global warming ay may malaking epekto sa mga tao like mga pagkagutom or food and water scarcity, pagtataas ng mga baha, pagtaas ng temperatura o sobrang init like El Nino and El Niña. Like pagdami ng mga sakit and yung isa pa is economic loss. According to the World Health Organization, they calls the climate change or the global warming as the greatest threat to global health in the 21st century. Even if even if the efforts to minimize future warming are successful, some effects will continue for centuries. This includes sea level rise and becoming it warmer and more acidic oceans. What are the drivers of the recent temperature rise? First, first is greenhouse gases. The earth absorbs sunlight then radiates it has that rate it as heat. Greenhouse gases in the atmosphere absorb and emit infrared radiation, slowing the rate at which it can pass through the atmosphere and escape into space. Before the Industrial Revolution, naturally, occurring amounts of greenhouse gases caused the air near the surface to be about 30 degrees Celsius warmer than it would have been in their absence, while the water vapor, which is 50%, and the clouds, which is 25%, are the biggest contributors to the greenhouse effect. They increase as the function of temperature and are therefore feedbacks. On the other hand, concentrations of gases such as carbon dioxide, which is 20%, tropospheric ozone, and CFCs and nitrous oxides are not temperature dependent and are therefore external forces. Human activity since the Industrial Revolution, mainly extracting and burning fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gases, has increased the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that was resulting in radiative imbalance. In the year 2019, the concentration of carbon dioxide and methane had increased by about 48% and 160% respectively since 1750. These carbon dioxide levels are higher than they have been in any time during the last 2 million years. Concentration of methane are far higher than they were over the last 800,000 years. The next one is aerosols and clouds. Air pollution in the form of aerosols not only put a large burden on human health, but also affects the climate on a large scale. From 1961 to 1990, a gradual reduction in the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth's surface was observed, a phenomenon popularly known as global dimming, typically attributed to aerosols from biofuel and fossil fuel burning. Globally, aerosols have been declining since 1990, meaning that they no longer mask greenhouse gas warming as much. Aerosols scatter and absorb solar radiation. They also have indirect effects on the Earth's radiation budget. So, sulfate aerosols act as a cloud condensation nuclei and lead to clouds to have more and smaller cloud droplets. These clouds reflect solar irradiation more efficiently than clouds with fewer and larger droplets. They also reduce the growth of raindrops, which makes clouds more reflective to incoming sunlight. Indirect effects of aerosols are the largest uncertainty in radiative forcing. While aerosols typically limit global warming by reflecting sunlight, black carbon in soot that falls on snow or ice can contribute to global warming. Not only does this increase the absorption of sunlight, it also increases melting of sea level rise, limiting new black carbon deposits in the Arctic could reduce global warming by by 0.2 degrees Celsius by 2050. The third one is the change of land surface. The amount of forested land continues to decrease, largely due to the conversion of cropland in the tropics. The deforestation is the most significant aspect of land surface change that affecting global warming. The main causes of deforestation are permanent land use change from forest to agricultural land producing products as beef and palm oil, which is 20%, lagging to produce the forestry or forest products, which is 26%, short-term shifting cultivation is 24%, and wildfires, which is 23%. Land use changes not only affect greenhouse gas emissions, the type of vegetation in a region affects the local temperature. So which means it impacts how much the sunlight gets reflected back into the space, or we call albedo. How much heat is lost by evaporation. Like for instance, the change from a dark forest to grassland makes the surface lighter, causing it to reflect more sunlight. So deforestation can also affect temperature by modifying the release of chemical compounds that influence clouds and by changing wind patterns. In tropic and temperate areas like here in the Philippines, the net effect is to produce significant warming, while the latitudes closer to the poles a gain of albedo as as forest is replaced by snow cover, which is lead to a cooling effect. Globally, these effects are estimated a led led to a slight cooling, dominated by an increase in surface albedo. The other one is solar and volcanic activity. What is solar and volcanic activity? Solar irradiance has been measured directly by satellites, and indirect measurements are available from the early 1600s onwards. Excuse me. There have there has been no upward trend in the amount of sun's energy reaching the Earth. Further evidence for greenhouse gases causing global warming comes from the measurement that show how warming of the lower atmosphere or the or otherwise the troposphere coupled with the cooling of the upper atmosphere and the troposphere. If solar variation were responsible for the observed warming, the troposphere and stratosphere would both warm. So the explosive volcanic eruption represents the largest natural forcing over the industrial era. So when the eruption is sufficiently strong, like with sulfur dioxide reaching the stratosphere, sunlight can be partially blocked for a couple of years. The temperature signal lasts about twice as long. If you can look, in the industrial era, volcanic activity has had negligible impacts on global temperature trends. In the present day, volcanic carbon dioxide emissions are equivalent to less than 1% of current anthropogenic carbon dioxide emission. The next one is climate change feedback. What is climate change feedback? The response of It is the response of the climate system to an initial forcing by modification by feedbacks that increase by self-reinforcing feedbacks and reduce by balancing feedbacks. The mainly enforcing feedbacks are the water vapor feedback and the ice albedo feedback, and probably the net effects of clouds. One of the primarily balancing mechanism is radiative cooling, as if as Earth's surface gives off more heat to space in response to rising temperature. In addition of this, temperature feedbacks, there are feedbacks in the carbon cycle, such as the fertilizing effect of carbon dioxide on plant growth. Are certainly over over feedbacks is the major reason why different climate models project different hmm, why different climate models project are different magnitudes of warming for a given amount of emissions. So as as air gets warmer, it can hold more moisture. Eventually, after initial warming due to emissions of greenhouse gases, the atmosphere will hold more water. Water vapor is the potent greenhouse gas, so this further heats the atmosphere. If the clouds cover increases, more sunlight will be reflected back into space, cooling the planet. If if the clouds become more thinner and higher, they act as insulator feedbacks over the industrial era, has probably exacerbated, which is probably exacerbated temperature rise. The reduction of snow, sorry for the reduction of snow, covers and sea ice in the Arctic reduces the albedo of Earth's surface. More of the sun's energy is now absorbed in these regions, contributing to amplification of Arctic temperature changes. Arctic amplification is also melting permafrost, which is releases methane and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So around half of the human cause of the carbon dioxide emission have been absorbed by land, plants, and by the oceans. On land, elevated carbon dioxide and an extended growing season have stimulated plant growth. Climate change increases droughts and heat waves that inhibit plant growth, which make it uncertain whether this carbon sink will continue to grow in the future, which soils contain large quantities of carbon and many release some when they heat up. As more carbon dioxide and heat are absorbed by the ocean, it acidifies its circulation changes, and phytoplankton takes up less carbon, that decreases the rate at which the ocean absorbs atmospheric carbon. Climate change can increase methane emissions from wetland, marine, and freshwater systems and permafrost. So these are the impacts of global warming. What is the impact of global warming in the physical environment? In the physical environment, the environmental effects of climate change or the global warming are broad and far-reaching, that affecting oceans, ice, and weather. Changes may occur gradually or rapidly. Many evidence for these effects comes from studying climate change in the past, from modeling and from modern observations. So since the 1950s, droughts and heat waves have appeared simultaneously with increasing frequency. Extremely wet or dry events within the monsoon period have increased in India and East Asia. The rainfall rate and intensity of hurricanes and typhoons is likely increasing. Also, the frequency of tropical cyclones has not increased as a result of climate change. The global sea level is rising as a consequence of glacial melt. Glacial melt of the ice sheets in the Greenland and Antarctica, and thermal expansion. So in the year between 1993 and the year 2023, which is last year, the rise was increased over time, averaging 3.3 to 0.3 millimeter per year over the over the over the past 21st century. The IPCC projects that in a very high emission scenario, the sea level could rise by 61 to 100 centimeter, that increase ocean warming and undermining and threatening to unplug Antarctic glaciers outlets, risking a large melt of the ice sheet and possibility of a 2-meter sea level rise by 2100s under high emissions. Global warming has led to decades of shrinking and thinning of Arctic sea ice, while ice-free summers are expected to be rare at 1.50 degrees of warming. They are said to occur once led to changes in ocean chemistry. So an increase is dissolved carbon dioxide is causing ocean to be unacidified. In addition, oxygen levels are decreasing oxy, decreasing as oxygen is less soluble in warmer water. Dead zones in the oceans regions with very little oxygen are expanding. The second one is the impact of in tipping points in long-term impacts. The greater the amount of global warming, the greater the risk of passing through tipping points, thresholds beyond which certain impacts can no longer to be avoided, even in temperatures are reduced. One of the example is the collapse of West Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets, where the temperature a rise of 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius may commit the ice sheets to melt, although the timescales of melt is uncertain and depends on future warming. One of the some large-scale changes could occur over a short time period, such as collapsed Atlantic meridional retuning circulations, which will trigger major climate changes in the North Atlantic, Europe, and North America. The long-term effects of climate change include the further ice melt, ocean warming, sea level rise, and the ocean acidification. On the timescales of centuries to millennia, the magnitude of climate change will be determined primarily by anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions. This is due to carbon dioxide's long atmospheric lifetime. Oceanic carbon dioxide uptake is low enough that ocean acidification will continue for hundreds to thousands of years. So in conclusion, these emissions are estimated to have prolonged the concurrent interglacial period by at least 100 years. So sea levels rise will continue over many centuries, with an estimated rise of 2.3 meters per degree Celsius, or 4.2 feet Fahrenheit after 2,000 years. The next one is the effect of global warming in nature and wildlife. In the recent warming has driven many terrestrial and freshwater species poleward and towards higher altitudes. In the higher atmospheric carbon dioxide level and an extended growing season have resulted in global greening. However, heat waves and droughts have reduced ecosystem productivity in some regions. The future balance of these opposing effects is unclear. So the climate change has contributed to the expansion of drier climate zones, like such, like going to such as the expansion of deserts in the subtropics. And the size of the speed of global warming is making abrupt changes in ecosystems more likely. So overall, it is expected that climate change will result in the extinction of many species. On another hand, the oceans have heated more slowly than the land, but plants and animals in the oceans have migrated towards the colder, colder poles faster than species on land. Just as on land, heat waves in the ocean occur more frequently due to climate change, harming a wide range of organisms such as the corals, kelp, and seabirds. Oceans acidification makes it harder for organisms such as mussels, barnacles, and corals to produce shells and skeletons. And heat waves have bleached coral reefs. So harmful algal blooms enhanced by climate change and eutrophication lower oxygen levels, disrupt food webs, and cause great loss of marine life. So coastal ecosystems are under particular stress. Almost half of the global wetlands have disappeared due to climate change and other human impacts. The impacts or the effects in humans. The most effects of climate change or the global warming on humans, mostly due to warming and shifts in precipitations, have been detected worldwide. Impacts are now observable on all continents and across ocean regions, with low altitude, less developed areas facing the great risk. Continued warming has potentially severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts for people and ecosystem. So the risks are unevenly distributed, but are generally greater for disadvantaged people in developing and developed countries. The next one, what are the effects or the impacts in food and health? Health impacts include the both and the direct effects of extreme weather, leading to injury and loss of life, and in indirect effects such as undernutrition brought on by crop failures. On the other hand, various infectious diseases are most easily transmitted in a warmer climate such as dengue fever, which affects children most severely, and malaria that they get in mosquitoes. Young children are the most vulnerable to food shortage, and together with older people, likely in also in extreme heat. According to the World Health Organization or WHO, they estimated between the year 2030 to 2050, the climate change is expected to cause around 250,000 additional deaths per year for heat exposure in elderly people. That increases in diarrheal diseases like malaria, dengue, and coastal flooding, and childhood undernutrition. Over 500,000 additional adult deaths are projected by 2050 due to reduction in food availability and quality. The other major health risks associated with climate change include the air and water quality. The WHO has classified human from climate change as the greatest threat to global health in the 21st century. Global warming is affecting food security. Yes, it has caused reduction in global mean yields of maize, with in soybeans between 1981 to the year and up to the year 2010. In the future, warming it could further reduce global yields of major crops. The crop's production will probably be negatively affected in low latitude countries, while effects at northern latitudes may be positive or negative. Up to an additional 183 million people worldwide, particularly those with lower incomes, are at risk of hunger as a consequence of this impact. So, in a conclusion, the effect of warming on the ocean impacts fish stocks with a global decline in the maximum catch potential. Only polar stocks are showing an increased potential. So many regions are dependent on glacial water, regions that are already dry, and small islands are increased risk of water stress due to the global warming and climate change. What is in the livelihood? Economic damages due to climate change may be severe, and there is a probability of the disastrous tail risk events. The climate change has likely already increased global economic inequality, and this trend is projected to continue. One of the most severe effects or impacts are impacted in Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia, where existing poverty is already exacerbated. The World Bank estimates that the climate change could drive over 120 million people into poverty by ethnicities that have been observed to worsen as a consequence of climate variability and climate change. An expert elicitation concluded that the role of climate change is an armed conflict has been small compared to factors such as the socio-economic inequality and state capabilities, but that future warming will bring increasing risk. In the low-lying islands and coastal communities are threatened through hazards posed by sea level rise, such as flooding and permanent submergence. This conclude that this could lead to statelessness for population in island nations, such as the Maldives and Tuvalu. In some regions, rise in temperature and humidity may be too severe for humans to adapt to. With the worst cases climate change, model projects that almost one-third of humanity might live in extremely hot and uninhabitable climates, similar to current climate found in Sahara. So these factors plus weather extremes can drive environmental migration, both within and between countries, displacement of people is expected to increase as a consequence of more frequent extreme weather. The sea level rise and conflict arising from increased competition over natural resources. Climate change may also increase vulnerability, leading to trapped population who are not able to move due to the lack of resources. So the question is, in our little way, how can we help to get rid of air pollution? In our little way of helping, we can make a huge difference. As a normal citizens, we can actually reduce air pollution by simply recycling plastic waste like like now yung mga bote ginagawa na nilang bangko ganon, yung mga they collect bottles to para i-recycle and i-process para gawin ding bangko. And it helps also the students na madagdagan lalo na yung mga public schools. And also try to avoid smoking. The simple act may not seem helpful, but when we practice, it actually does. In our little way, I think we can control the spreading of air pollution by using bicycle or just by simply walking if our destination just our walking distance. Yes, like kung hindi naman talaga kinakailangan magsakyan, pwede ka naman maglakad or gumamit ng bicycle, which is an eco-friendly vehicle. As well, we need to stop burning garbages, especially in outdoors. Like now, meron na yata mga batas or ordinance sa iba't ibang barangay and municipalities and towns na bawal na magsunog or lalo na yung mga plastic, which is pag may nakita silang nagsusunog, may mga penalties ganon na silang maipapasa sa mga taong nagsusunog. Okay, so thank you for listening. I'm Lee Andre Layog from BSIE 1C. Thank you po.